Imagine lining up your sights on a German Panther, knowing your shell won't do a damn thing. For years, American crews lived that nightmare watching rounds bounce and friends burn. Then in the frozen forests of Europe, a new gun spoke once. Steel flue turrets blew, and the hunters panicked. This wasn't just another tank. This was America's last gamble, and it hit like thunder. Picture the moment every American tanker feared most. Your Sherman creeps forward through smoke and shattered hedgerows. The gunner steadies his aim. The trigger is pulled, and nothing happens. The shell slams into German armor and skips away like a thrown stone. Seconds later, the answer comes back, fast, precise, lethal. Your tank erupts in flame. By 1943, this was no rare encounter. It was routine. Across Europe, American crews were running headlong into a new kind of enemy, German Panthers and Tigers machines, built not just to fight, but to dominate. Their armor was thick-sloped and unforgiving. Their guns struck first and killed at distances U.S. crews had never trained to survive. What once worked against Panzer IIIs and IVs now failed completely. Inside burning Sherman's crews learned a brutal truth through fire and steel: they were outgunned. Reports from the front spoke of shells bouncing harmlessly off glacis plates of entire units, forced to retreat under the pressure of German heavy armor. Morale cracked. Confidence vanished. Tankers whispered bitter jokes, calling their own guns pea shooters, knowing laughter was the only thing keeping fear at bay. This wasn't just a tactical problem, it was an existential one. If American armor couldn't stop Germany's steel monsters, then every breakthrough, every infantry advance, every hope of pushing deeper into Europe was at risk. The battlefield had changed, and the United States was suddenly fighting a war it was not equipped to win. Something had to change, and fast. The German army did not stumble into superiority by accident. It engineered it. Early victories had been won with speed columns of lighter panzers racing through gaps, collapsing entire fronts before defenders could react. But by 1942, the battlefield demanded something more brutal. Allied guns were getting stronger. Air power was tightening its grip. Germany answered not with finesse, but with mass and menace. The Tiger came first, tall, imposing, wrapped in thick vertical armor, and armed with a deadly 88mm gun. It was a moving fortress. Then came the Panther, lower, faster, and far more dangerous than its silhouette suggested. Its sharply sloped glacis turned incoming rounds aside, while its long-barreled cannon reached out and killed from beyond the effective range of most Allied tanks. These were not vehicles designed for maneuver warfare alone. They were built to win gunfights. On paper, they were complex, heavy, even temperamental. On the battlefield, they were devastating. German crews learned to exploit their strengths, engaging from distance, choosing terrain, forcing enemies into frontal encounters they could not survive. A single Panther, properly positioned, could halt an advance cold. For American tankers, the shock was immediate. The rules they had trained under no longer applied. Mobility no longer guaranteed survival. Initiative no longer meant advantage. The moment a Panther's gun spoke, the fight was already tilted. Germany had shifted the equation of armored warfare. The battlefield was no longer a contest of movement, but of penetration and protection. And in that new equation, German steel sat firmly on top. The Allies would have to adapt or be crushed beneath it. American crews went to war trusting their machines. The Sherman had carried them across North Africa and into Europe, reliable, fast, and familiar. Its 75-millimeter gun had been enough before. Enough until it wasn't. When Panthers and Tigers entered the fight, the illusion shattered. At combat ranges, American gunners did everything right. Proper lead, clean sight picture, solid hits. And still the rounds failed. Shells slammed into sloped armor and ricocheted skyward. Impacts left scars, not penetrations. Against the Panthers' glacis or the Tiger's massive front plate, the 75mm might as well have been firing warnings. Even the dedicated tank destroyers suffered the same fate. The M10, armed with a 3-inch gun and built to hunt enemy armor, found itself humiliated. From the front, it simply could not kill Germany's heavy tanks. Crews learned quickly that a head-on fight meant death. Many never got the chance to withdraw. The technical reality was unforgiving. German armor geometry defeated American penetration tables. Higher muzzle velocity meant nothing when the projectile shattered or deflected. Range only made the problem worse. Every yard closer increased risk, yet even at point-blank distance, success was never guaranteed. After-action reports painted a grim picture. Units decimated, attacks stalled. Tankers burned alive inside vehicles designed for a different war. Confidence in equipment collapsed, replaced by a fatalistic acceptance that survival depended more on luck than firepower. This wasn't about courage. It wasn't about training. It was physics and steel. By late 1943, the verdict was undeniable. America's frontline guns were obsolete against Germany's new armor. Until that imbalance was corrected, every engagement with Panthers and Tigers would remain a gamble, and the odds were brutally against the men pulling the triggers. The United States had not built its armored forces to fight this kind of battle. Before the war, American planners believed tanks had a clear mission: exploit breakthroughs, support infantry, and keep moving. Speed was survival. Shock came from numbers and maneuver, not from trading blows with enemy armor. Tank-on-tank duels, they believed, were a mistake. To deal with enemy armor, the U.S. Army created something entirely separate: the Tank Destroyer Force. Its doctrine was precise and uncompromising. When German tanks broke through, fast-moving tank destroyer battalions would race to the threatened sector, set up ambushes, and annihilate the attackers with concentrated fire. They would strike from concealment, then disappear before return fire could find them. It was a hunter's philosophy built on initiative and timing. On paper, it made sense. Early in the war, it worked. In North Africa, lightly armored German panzers fell to American ambushes. M3 gun motor carriages, little more than half tracks with mounted guns, proved deadly when used correctly. Later came the M10, built on a Sherman chassis, faster and more stable, with a powerful 3-inch cannon and an open turret that offered visibility and command of the battlefield. Crews believed in the doctrine. They trained to flank, to relocate, to fight smart instead of fighting fair. For a time, the system delivered results. But doctrine assumes the enemy plays by the same rules. When Panthers and Tigers appeared, they shattered the foundation of the American concept. These were not breakthrough raiders. They were armored dominators. They could absorb punishment, dictate engagement ranges, and kill from the front. The Tank Destroyer Force suddenly faced a nightmare scenario. It was never designed for enemies. It could not ambush, outmaneuver, or outgun. The theory remained sound. The battlefield reality had changed. And now America's entire armored philosophy stood on the brink of collapse. At first, the American system seemed to work exactly as intended. In the open deserts of North Africa, German armor was lighter, less protected, and vulnerable to surprise. Tank destroyer units moved fast, struck hard, and vanished before the enemy could react. Ambushes were clean. Engagements were decisive. Reports spoke of efficiency, flexibility, and proof that the doctrine was sound. The M3 gun motor carriage led the way. Crude by later standards, an exposed gun bolted to a half-track. It was never meant to survive prolonged combat. It didn't need to. Against Panzer IIIs and early Panzer IVs, it killed effectively from concealment. Speed and positioning mattered more than armor. Then came the M10. Built on the reliable Sherman chassis, it looked like a true hunter. Sloped armor, a rotating open-top turret, a 3-inch gun that on paper promised enough penetration to handle any German tank it was expected to face. Crews felt they finally had a purpose-built weapon, not an improvisation. Training reinforced the confidence. Flank the target. Fire first. Relocate immediately. Victory came from discipline and movement, not brute force. And for a time, reality matched the theory. But war never stays still. As 1943 unfolded, new silhouettes appeared on the horizon, lower, wider, heavier. Panthers rolled onto the battlefield, followed by Tigers. Suddenly, the engagements that once ended in minutes stretched into disasters. The M10's gun no longer decided the fight. The hunter's edge dulled. What had once been success bred complacency. Commanders trusted a formula forged against an earlier enemy. Crews went into battle believing they held the advantage until their first rounds bounced. The danger was no longer ignorance. It was overconfidence. And when that illusion finally shattered, it would do so in fire steel and catastrophic loss. The turning point came without mercy. In 1943, on the battlefields of Italy and later Normandy, American tank destroyer units met the Panther head-on and paid the price. What had once been calculated ambushes turned into lethal mismatches. The enemy no longer blundered into kill zones. Instead, German tanks dictated the fight. M10 crews watched their carefully aimed shots strike home and fail. Armor-piercing rounds shattered or ricocheted. The Panther answered with a single devastating return shot. Distance offered no safety. Closing in only meant dying faster. After-action reports were brutal. Entire sections wiped out in minutes. Positions abandoned not by choice, but by necessity. Morale cracked as crews realized that their doctrine offered no answer to frontal encounters with Germany's new armor. The phrase spread quickly through the ranks. Don't fight them head-on, a rule learned the hard way. Nicknames followed. Bitter ones, pea shooters, tin coffins. Humor used to mask terror. Commanders at higher levels could no longer ignore the pattern. Reports from Normandy described Panthers dominating crossroads and hedgerows, stopping advances cold. In Italy's broken terrain, Tigers controlled valleys and roads with impunity. Even the British solution, the 17-pounder mounted on Firefly Shermans, was only a partial fix, effective but scarce. This was no longer a local problem. It was systemic. The American tank destroyer force had reached its breaking point. Speed, maneuver, and doctrine could not overcome physics and steel. The hunters had lost their teeth, and now they were being hunted. If the United States did not act quickly, the cost would be measured not in territory, but in lives burned inside powerless machines. By late 1943, denial was no longer possible. The reports piling up on commanders' desks told the same story. In different words, American guns couldn't stop German heavy armor. Not reliably. Not from the front. Not at the ranges that modern armored combat demanded. The problem was no longer tactical, it was mathematical. Incremental fixes were rejected. A slightly better shell, a minor tweak to an existing gun, none of it would be enough. To face Panthers and Tigers, the United States needed a decisive leap in firepower, not another compromise. The benchmark was clear. Germany's 88mm gun had become the yardstick of battlefield dominance. It killed tanks, shattered bunkers, and controlled terrain through sheer reach. Any American answer would have to match it in penetration accuracy and psychological effect. Ordnance officers and engineers began looking beyond tank guns entirely. The solution was hiding in plain sight, aimed not at tanks, but at the sky. The 90mm anti-aircraft gun had already earned a reputation. Designed to hurl heavy shells at high-altitude bombers, it possessed everything American tankers lacked: velocity, stability, and brutal kinetic energy. On paper, its penetration figures were devastating. In controlled tests, it promised what crews at the front desperately needed: a kill at range. But potential meant nothing without adaptation. A weapon built for concrete emplacements and radar-directed fire had to be transformed into a mobile killer capable of moving with armored units and surviving return fire. The question was no longer if America needed a new gun. It was whether it could deliver one in time before German steel decided the war on its own terms. The 90mm gun was never meant to stare down tanks. It had been built for a different war, aimed upward, tracking bombers miles above the battlefield. Fixed in concrete mounts, guided by directors and radar, it hurled heavy shells with blistering velocity. Against aircraft, it tore wings from the sky. Against armor, its true potential was only just being realized. Engineers saw the numbers and understood immediately. Penetration tables were unforgiving, and the 90mm rewrote them. At 1,000 yards, its projectile could punch through armor thicknesses that Panthers and Tigers depended on for survival. This wasn't a marginal improvement, it was a qualitative shift. But adapting the gun was no simple task. Anti-aircraft weapons didn't need to depress sharply. Tank guns did. The breech had to be redesigned, recoil systems reinforced, sights recalibrated for direct fire instead of altitude and lead. The result was a new lineage, the M1 refined into the M2, and finally the M3, a true dual-purpose weapon optimized for armored combat. For the first time, American designers held a gun that could stand in the same league as Germany's feared 88. Test firings were decisive. Steel plates shattered, weld seams split. The data left no room for doubt. If this gun could be brought to the front on a mobile platform, the balance of power could shift back in America's favor. Yet a gun alone does not fight wars. It needed a vehicle fast enough to reposition, stable enough to fire accurately, and rugged enough to survive long enough for its crew to pull the trigger twice. The clock was already ticking. What followed would be a race against time, steel, and the advancing shadow of German armor. A breakthrough in firepower meant nothing if it couldn't reach the battlefield. With the 90mm gun ready, American engineers faced a ruthless constraint time. Designing an entirely new vehicle would take years the men at the front did not have. The answer had to be fast, practical, and built from what already existed. They turned to the M10 tank destroyer. Its chassis was proven. Its automotive systems were familiar. Crews knew how to maintain it under fire. But mounting the 90mm was not a simple swap. The gun was heavier, longer, and far more violent in recoil than anything the M10 had carried before. A new turret was cast larger, rounder, and sloped to deflect incoming fire. At its center sat a massive mantellate designed to absorb the brutal recoil forces. To keep weight under control and preserve speed, the turret remained open-topped, a controversial choice that exposed crews to shrapnel grenades and the elements. It was a calculated risk. Mobility and firepower came first. Balance became the next challenge. The long barrel threatened to overwhelm the turret ring, so a counterweight bustle was added at the rear. It doubled as ammunition storage, holding 11 precious rounds of 90mm shells. Every shot mattered. Inside, the improvements were immediate. A powered traverse system replaced the slow hand cranks of earlier destroyers, allowing the gunner to track targets quickly, a critical advantage when seconds decided survival. This was no longer just a gun on a chassis. It was a purpose-built hunter. What emerged was raw, imperfect, and dangerous to its own crew, but it carried something the American Army had been missing for 2 years: the ability to strike back. What began as an emergency adaptation quickly evolved into something more refined and far more dangerous. As production accelerated, the new vehicle received its official designation 90mm gun motor carriage M36. Among crews, it would earn a simpler, harder name, the Jackson. Official or not, the nickname stuck, carried by the long barrel and the reputation it was about to build. The base model mounted the new turret on the gasoline-powered M10A1 chassis, delivering a balance of speed and firepower unmatched by earlier tank destroyers. But urgency bred flexibility. Shortages and battlefield demands forced engineers to improvise. One solution was the M36B1, which placed the massive 90mm turret atop the sturdier M4A3 Sherman hull. It combined familiar mobility with unprecedented punch. Another, the M36B2, used diesel-powered M10 hulls, adapting whatever resources could be spared. Different engines, different logistics, same gun. That gun defined everything. In controlled trials, the 90mm demonstrated penetration figures that finally put American crews back in the fight. At combat ranges, it could defeat Panther armor and threaten even the feared Tiger. Compared to the British 17-pounder, it offered tighter accuracy at distance. Against the German Long 88, it narrowed a gap that had once seemed impossible to close. Yet the Jackson was no heavy tank. At just over 30 tons, it relied on speed and precision, not armor thickness. Its open turret remained a vulnerability. Its survival depended on positioning, timing, and discipline. By mid-1944, the verdict was clear. This was no stopgap. The M36 was the culmination of America's tank destroyer evolution. A machine born from desperation, sharpened by necessity, and finally ready to face Germany's best steel head-on. The true significance of the M36 was not in its silhouette, but in the numbers. On firing ranges and test grounds, American ordnance officers put the new 90mm gun under ruthless scrutiny. Armor plates were angled, hardened, and struck at distance. The results were impossible to ignore. At 1,000 yards, the gun could drive through armor thicknesses once considered immune. For the first time, Panther crews could no longer assume safety at range. Compared to the British 17-pounder, the American guns showed tighter shot grouping at long distances. Where dispersion widened for others, the 90mm remained consistent, an advantage that mattered when a single hit determined survival. Against Germany's long-barreled 88, the contest was no longer one-sided. In some conditions, the American round even proved more accurate, but raw penetration told only part of the story. Engineers refined every detail to make the weapon controllable in combat. Muzzle brakes tamed recoil. Gun travel locks stabilized the barrel on the move. Power traverse allowed rapid target acquisition. Each improvement shaved seconds from engagement time, seconds that decided whether a crew lived or burned. Yet the data also revealed hard limits. Even with its power, the 90mm could not reliably penetrate the frontal armor of the King Tiger. Physics still ruled the battlefield. Victory would require tactics, not miracles. The Jackson was not a sledgehammer. It was a scalpel. Used correctly at range, from concealment with discipline, it could dismantle Germany's armored advantage. Used carelessly, it was as vulnerable as anything that came before it. For American crews, the message was clear. This gun finally gave them a chance. What they did with it would decide everything. When the M36 finally reached Europe, it did so quietly. There were no parades, no announcements, just a handful of new vehicles unloaded from ships and rushed straight to tank destroyer battalions, clawing their way across France. To the men who climbed inside, the difference was immediate. The long 90mm barrel stretching beyond the turret felt like insurance hard-earned and long overdue. Normandy was no proving ground. It was a killing field. Hedgerows choked visibility. Narrow roads funneled armor into ambushes. Panthers waited at crossroads, engines idling guns already laid on approach routes. This was where earlier American destroyers had died. The Jackson changed the equation. In its first engagements, crews discovered they could finally fight at distance. Panthers that once dominated fields were now vulnerable. A well-placed shot could crack armor that had mocked them for months. When scarce HVAP rounds were issued, the effect was devastating, but supply was thin. Most crews carried only a few guarding them, for the moment a Tiger or Panther revealed itself. Yet the M36 was no miracle machine. Its open turret became a liability under artillery bursts and machine gun fire. Rain and dust poured in. Shrapnel cut through fighting compartments. Crews improvised canvas covers, welded plates, anything to survive the next engagement. But despite the risks, morale surged. For the first time since Panthers arrived in force, American tank destroyer crews felt they could meet German armor on something close to equal terms. Normandy did not belong to the Jackson, but it proved one thing beyond doubt. The gun worked, and winter was coming. December 13th, 1944. The Ardennes lay frozen beneath snow and silence until German engines shattered the calm. In a last desperate gamble, the Reich hurled its remaining armored strength forward. Panthers, Tigers, and king tigers surged out of the forest, smashing into thin American lines. For many units, survival seemed impossible. This was the moment the M36 Jackson had been built for. At St. Veth, a critical crossroads, Jacksons crept into position behind hedgerows and shattered buildings. Engines idled. Crews waited, breath fogging the air inside open turrets. When the first Panther appeared confident and exposed, the order came. One 90mm round crossed the snow, and the turret erupted in flame. Panic rippled through the German column. The hunters had become the hunted. Across the Ardennes, similar scenes unfolded. Jackson crews achieved kills at distances once thought absurd. Corporal Anthony Pinto destroyed a Panther at nearly 4,000 yards, one of the longest confirmed tank kills of the war. Lieutenant Alfred Rose matched the feat days later, proving it was no fluke.